You love your mid-century house. Hooray! How do you feel about the yard, though? Today I'm sharing advice you can start taking action on ASAP. Not my own. This is coming from Jim Drzewiecki, landscape architect and owner of Ginkgo Leaf Studio here in Wisconsin. And we're talking about starting smart with mid-century landscaping. If you haven't done much in your yard, or you have questions or doubts about some of the choices you've already made, you will find helpful guidance on beginning well and setting yourself up for success. How to make smart, seasonal, easy, and beautiful choices for improving the yard around a mid-century house. Begin with just one bed or go further. Spoiler alert, Jim drops a couple of ideas today so good that I'm going to immediately start applying them into how I design house-adjacent exterior space for my clients. Grab a notebook, pull up a notes file on your computer, just pay attention because this is going to get good. Hey there, welcome back to Mid-Mod Remodel. This is the show about updating MCM homes, helping you match a mid-century home to your modern life. I'm your host, Della Hansman, architect and mid-century ranch enthusiast. You're listening to episode 2205. Before we get started, I'm curious about how you like to take in your mid-mod content. Obviously, you're not averse to a little podcast listening. That's how you're hearing me now. But depending on when and how you're hunting your info or how you're sharing it, you might enjoy variety. Many of our podcast episodes are formatted for reading. With your eyes on the Mid-Mod Midwest blog, you'll find a transcript of every recent episode there. And if you prefer video content, you might want to check out our relatively new YouTube channel. Head over there and follow Mid-Mod Midwest in order to get a YouTube link without video for each podcast episode, plus the occasional condensed advice video specifically for YouTube on a wide range of mid-mod topics. If you find yourself particularly in the position of being a big fan of the Mid-Mod Remodel podcast yourself, aw, shucks, but wanting to recommend some of the ideas I share with a friend who prefers video or short-form content, YouTube is a great place to start sharing. The video of this convo with Jim will show up on YouTube pretty soon, too. If you want more of Jim as soon as you're done with this episode, just search for his name in the podcast platform you're using, or head over to the show notes page for links and other super valuable conversations he and I have had over the last few years. Plus, stay tuned. There'll be a follow-up conversation to this one shared later this fall. For now, here we go. Okay, this is great. It's so fun to be back here with you, Jim. Jim Drzewiecki, landscape designer and owner of Ginkgo Leaf Studio. You are my go-to resource for outside of mid-century houses, what to do in the yard, how to think about plants, how to think about yards connecting to houses, which is a really important part of mid-century design. So it's a pleasure to be here with you again. And I know people always really enjoy these episodes. I actually was thinking about some questions I've been getting from people who come to me asking about yard things in the interim since last we spoke. They're often talking about sort of jumping off points, where to get started. And I suspect that your answer will be similar to mine, but I was wondering if you had advice for someone who wanted to just do a beginner project, start with one bed. Is there like a right place to begin in the yard, or where would you jump in if you were trying to start small with making choices for landscaping around a mid-century house?
Sure.
House.
Well, and also, as always, it's a pleasure to be back with you. I really enjoy having these conversations with a like-minded mid-century fan.
Yeah.
And we have this, small sphere of people. You've interviewed Aylin before and others, and I enjoy listening to those podcasts too. So I'm happy to be back. I think there are great small projects for a homeowner to tackle. My favorite idea about maybe adding a new bed somewhere, a new planting area somewhere, and I don't think people think about this a lot, but at least here in the Midwest, it's kind of sad maybe how much time we are spending living in our houses versus being outside.
Yeah.
So something I always think about is the view outside of a window.
Oh, yeah.
And so many mid-century homes have these big picture windows. So I might think about, and maybe it's in the middle of the front yard, but a garden that's specifically for the view from inside the house.
That's, I don't know why I'm so surprised by that, but I also, if I was to think, what would I do for landscaping? Well, first I would ask you, but if I couldn't, I would probably start with a picture of the house from the road and then think about what it looks like from the curb. But you're right. You're the person who's inside your house the most. It's your yard. Why wouldn't you think about your experience of looking out?
Right. And similarly, if someone said, We'd like to add a fire pit area, but we don't know where to place it.
Hmm.
I always think it's truly a first world problem when we think, oh my gosh, I have to walk 50 feet out into my yard to get to my fire pit. But one of my favorite things to do, and I think it ties back to the architecture of the house, let's play picture window idea again.
Hmm.
We take the center line of that window and we pull it out into the yard, and that might be where I center the fire pit area.
Oh,
Because
interesting. Yeah.
not only are you giving a focal point from the view inside the house out, but if you get yourself a really cool fire pit, well, now it's almost a sculpture to look at, even when there's not a fire in it.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to think about it. And when I'm thinking about the spaces right adjacent to a house, a deck or a patio, I'm often thinking about how the proportions of the room can be sort of mirrored outside. If we've got a long rectangular living room, maybe we create a similar space outside that kind of squares off with the wall of the house in the middle.
For sure.
But it does often sort of just expand the house outside of itself a little bit in a bubble rather than incorporating the whole yard. So you're right. People often want their grill right outside the kitchen door, but if you're thinking about an evening settle in the dark around a fire experience, maybe that should be you want to go for a little walk in your yard, and giving it a view so you look at it, you see it, and you want to go out to there is it's as good a reason as any to put it in one place.
See, and I didn't think of that aspect, so I'm going to steal that idea from you, that when you look out your window and see the fire pit area, maybe you say to yourself, let's have a fire tonight.
Mm-hmm. Right. If
And
it's too private, you will forget about it.
right. I think people do that sometimes with their vegetable gardens. If they place them too far out of the way, they're not on top of mind,
Mm-hmm.
and you either forget to water, you forget to weed, you end up with 3 foot long zucchinis because you haven't been out in your garden in a while.
Yeah.
But I think creating an outdoor space that is a destination, even if it's just hanging that space off the edge of the patio, it doesn't have to be out in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's off the edge of your current patio, that can make it feel like that helps to make it feel like it's a separate space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I probably default as much as any other designer to thinking in plan a lot when I'm citing things. But thinking about your view lines from the house is really logical, and yet not the way we necessarily gravitate to things. And line of sight is really important for anything you want to do in your daily life. I mean, I struggle with a little bit of the sort of designer brain, maybe / ADHD distraction of I'm always doing the thing that's in front of me, and I will absolutely neglect parts of my yard I can't see. I have a seating arrangement of deck chairs that I actually don't use that I keep visible from my house, because the best place to hang a hammock, which I do use, is out of sight of all of my windows. But when I see the deck chairs, I want to go sit in my hammock, and then I do.
Well, so by association.
By association. Place to sit outside, even though realistically, I literally never sit in them. I've let the cushions become unpleasant. But the hammock is there, and it's hiding just out of sight around the corner by the best tree.
Yeah, and going back to centering on a view, you and I have talked about this before. Striking lines off of a mid-century house. We've called them lines of force.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the center line of a window. It might be the corner. It might be the middle of the chimney. Those are these underlying guidelines that I feel like to us, they're so obvious.
Yeah.
And they make our lives easier as designers. But it's kind of the house is telling you where this thing should be, whether it's a plant bed, whether it's another outdoor space. Listen to the house. And of course, since the whole mantra of mid-century design is the blurring of inside and outside,
Mm-hmm.
that's yet another reason to let the house kind of guide you as to where things should be placed.
Right. Let those shapes, let the windows, let the change in material, a difference in the overhang of the roof line, let those things direct
All of
you
those.
from there. Yeah, absolutely. That's okay. Well, this isn't actually the direction I thought we were going to go with this conversation, but I love it. And I think it's incredibly useful when you're thinking of a small project. It's sometimes kind of a one-off. Where can I put a new bed? Where can I put a seating area, a feature? And what to do is maybe the first question, but then where does it go? You can't successfully execute a plan unless you know where it's going to happen.
Right. And it might even be chicken and egg a little bit. I want a space. Where does it go? Or where's it going to go before I even really decide what it's going to become?
Yeah.
I still think, though, the best, after you've figured that first step out, sketch something. Um, Put something
Agreed.
on paper, because truly just winging it, I hate to say this, but a design professional like you or I, we can get away with it because we maybe have that, innate sense in our brains. But truth be told, when my wife and I moved into our second house, she told me, "You are not winging this one." And she said, "I want to see an actual plan before you do anything." And even though we've done it in phases, after the front yard was done, she wouldn't let me touch the backyard until she saw a plan first.
Well, that actually gets to another. We are splitting out functions of the same brain, or possibly we're solving the problems that we encounter universally over and over again. Because I think it's one of the best arguments for design is that it helps you yourself plan ahead. But another really important part of putting your ideas on paper and being clear about them is that it helps partner agreement and buy-in. And often I think it's maybe even more true with garden things. If there's one person who's got a green thumb and likes spending time in the yard and another person who just wants to enjoy the aesthetic of it, that doesn't mean the other person doesn't get a say. But if they don't have a moment of shared vision, if you don't put it on paper so your wife can check it out and talk to you about it, she won't know what's going to happen until it's done. And I think that happens, and I see that with my clients as well, too. There's often someone who is taking point. They're more interested and more engaged in the process at first, but it's easy for that person to just make a lot of plans and get them in motion. And maybe I don't know what's worse, if it's all done and someone's unhappy with the results, or if you get to the almost execution moment and someone's like, time out, wait, what are we doing? No, I don't agree to that. But everything has been paid for and planned for. And that can be really chaotic. So the earlier in a design process, or the early in the process of doing anything, you can get everyone agreed. That's really important.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it can be as simple as, "Oh, I didn't know you were going to put a tree there." If it had been on paper, that could have been a discussion that was had before the tree was sitting there, ready to be planted.
With a drying group ball. Yeah.
The whole reason we encourage couples to fill out our design questionnaire together is so that I don't show up at the first design meeting and I need to put on my black and white striped shirt to be referee, because I've literally had a client, the wife said, "I thought we were doing a deck," and the husband said, "No, I thought we were doing a patio." And that's a
And you're standing right
horrible,
there.
yeah, that's a horrible
Oh,
position
no.
for me to be in. And luckily I'm there to maybe weigh the pros and cons of both of those ideas.
Yeah.
But to think it through, buy-in from each person who's involved. Maybe, you both want a tree, but one of you thinks it should be on the right side of the patio and the other thinks it should be on the left side. Well, better to figure that out on paper
Yeah.
than someone puts it in the ground and the other person looks out the window and says, "What?"
Yeah, no, I think everyone who's ever worked in anything residential has probably encountered surprise spousal disagreement on site before. And I really
Sure.
try hard not to be a couples counselor, but it's a little inevitable.
Right.
The referee shirt, that's That's a good metaphor. But I agree. I think the best remedy for that I've ever discovered is to get everybody to agree up front as close to the beginning of the process as possible of what are we trying to do? And then what are we doing and what does it look like? And
Yeah.
then we all like it. Okay, good. We can go from there. And you experience it in your own life. I don't have to share the decisions in my house with a partner, but I also second guess myself if I haven't thought things through well enough. And that sort of dive in enthusiastically with the energy of the moment and then regret it afterwards is also a byproduct of not having planned even a little bit properly first. Before we were talking on the recording, you mentioned the sort of Memorial Day weekend mistake. I wondered if you'd elaborate on that one a little bit.
Sure. I think it's very common in the Midwest. I would guess for sure I've seen it in Wisconsin, having lived here my entire life. But we're so happy to feel that summer is coming, that Memorial Day weekend, no lie, is when all the garden centers are arguably the busiest they've been up until that point.
Mm-hmm. And they know it and they're planning for it.
Right. And now what happens is the plants are blooming Memorial Day weekend and they look amazing. That's when all the color is there. And as you said, everything's flowering. Well, there may be other perennials off to the side that aren't flowering, and people will, ignore them likely and only grab everything that looks great at that moment. And while when you get home and you put them in the ground, your yard's going to look great for a few weeks. But after that, and more importantly, maybe by mid-July, you're going to look out your window and say, oh my gosh, we have no flowers in our yard anymore. What happened? And it's simply because you weren't thinking about the seasonality. You got sucked into buying only the plants that looked really pretty at that time.
Yeah.
And Hannah, really brought that up. It will take us in the discussion of how we choose plants, but really thinking about the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite things about designing projects in the Midwest is that we get all 4 seasons to play with.
Yeah, we really do.
As
and yards are
opposed
different
to,
in each.
Right. We've done a few projects in Arizona. We've done 2 projects in California and even a project in Dallas. And of course, working with those plant palettes was super fun. But I've visited one of our Arizona projects and their spring means the cacti are blooming. But other than that, there isn't much really visible seasonality the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Most of their trees don't lose their leaves, or the leaves don't even change color. But those are all the fun things we can think about here. And if you think it through, and it might just mean, doing some Google research if you're a homeowner and you want to figure this out on your own, you're simply going to look for, in Wisconsin, zone 5 spring perennials, zone 5 summer perennials, zone 5 fall perennials.
Mm-hmm.
And here, we have 2 or 3 perennials that are our go-to that actually bloom in the fall. When you'd think your garden is done, we have these little surprise plants we like to put in our designs because all of a sudden you think everything's winding down, school is starting, and wait a minute, there's a plant that just started blooming in this shade garden. What's that?
That is really nice. And thinking about what's going to start early too, to sort of give you that early feeling of joy. Also, so important.
Oh,
I think that's
sure.
my instincts around plants are less organized than yours. But I was noticing this summer, I made that guilty. I made that classic mistake myself. I did the prairie bed in front of my house by asking my mom what I saw around me that was pretty in the fall. And go figure, nothing in that plant bloomed. That bed blooms until July at the earliest. Looks great all through the fall. And then it kind of looks like dead weeds all winter, but that's a separate problem. But I was doing it. I was thinking about solving this problem a little more instinctively this summer. I was walking around thinking my yard didn't look like anything and noticing a couple of other people's yards who had planned better than me and saying, what's that thing that's pretty right now? Okay, I'm going to take a picture of it. I'm going to Google image search that and see if that's something I should add to my yard. But I don't know what the right time to do that is. If I want to put in like alliums, that's a bulb thing. So I've got to plan now, not next May, to make those come up.
Yeah, I mean, just to prove that I'm not infallible either, I was looking at one of the beds in our backyard off of our patio. It's a bed I had to put out in the lawn around a couple of our septic caps to help camouflage them. And I just happened to notice that only 2 plants were blooming in it in early August. And there should have been a third blooming, but it was not doing well, and it may have been getting too much sun. It was in a stilby, which really should be in a shade garden. But I thought where I had it, it would do fine, but it wasn't. And so I thought, I've got to replace these astilbe with something else. Well, I don't know if my wife saw me standing in the backyard staring at this bed, but one evening she says to me, how come we don't have a lot of things blooming in that bed right now? And I said, oh, well, first of all, I already figured that out. And here's one of the reasons why. But homeowners can do this. I went through my, plant library in my head, and I can even look in other places in my yard and say, oh, well, the monardas are blooming right now, bee balm. I could put that in this bed. My coneflowers are all blooming right now. I could add more coneflower if I wanted to. Hyssop is blooming right now. But I was really curious about what else I might add to that mix. So here's what a homeowner can do. It's a repeat of Memorial Day weekend. You go to the garden center now and you see what might be blooming and buy a few of those things. Now, the caveat to this, and this is why I would say this idea of maybe doing a late summer project in your yard, there is a problem with that from a plant availability standpoint. I was at a Stein Garden Center in the middle of July, and almost all their perennials were already gone. And even the more serious garden centers, I'm finding that once they sell out of something, they're not restocking.
Interesting.
So if you want to do a later summer project or even in the fall, and fall can be a great time to put plants in, be aware that your selection may not be that great. And even if you find a plant that was on your list, they may not look so great. You might be getting the left behind scraps that maybe you say, well, we're not going to find everything we wanted. Let's just wait till spring to put these plants in when we're going to have a much better choice of plants.
So realistically, from just a garden center logistic perspective, regardless of when things are going to bloom, you're going to get better specimens and you're more likely to find them locally if you go in spring.
I think so. Now, that being said, I've seen Steins bring plants in this time of year because they know they are blooming now. But there's a garden center near my office that once they're out, they're out. And then even when I was there looking for a specific shrub, I needed 3, they had 1. And I specifically asked, are you getting more? And she said, nope, that's it. So then I went to a second garden center and I found 2 more there and I got my 3. But plant availability this time of year, especially the spring blooming plants, could be absolutely 0 this time of year because they were all sold at the beginning of the season.
When they were looking pretty. Yeah.
When they were looking pretty, right.
So there's a certain amount of, well, I mean, I would assume any yard work really is the long game. You can try to do something to fix a problem right now. You can certainly plant a pretty flower that's in bloom, but if you really want a yard that's going to flourish and work well in every season over time, you're probably, even you are tweaking your own yard. But Are there other projects? I mean, we started by talking about a fire pit. Maybe it's better to think about a yard project that's not as plant-based if you're looking for a fall project and then leave planting to the spring, or do you think that seems true?
Oh yeah. We've had quite a few projects where we're designing them in the middle of summer.
Mhm.
Just because of contractors' schedule, they're not going to get installed until the fall. And there is a threshold of how late you want to put plants in the ground. You can put woody plants in really almost until the ground freezes. So those are your shrubs and your evergreens and your trees. But I have started to find that maybe after October 1st, you may not want to put perennials in the ground anymore. Um, if they don't really, and especially smaller ones, smaller pot-sized plants,
Mhm.
they don't have enough time to set their roots, you run the risk of frost heave actually pushing them out of the ground during the winter. And when the snow is gone in the spring, you have a bunch of dead plants. I've even literally seen an ornamental grass that was in a gallon pot, so it should have been okay, but you could see the soil sticking out of the ground a good 2 inches in the shape of the pot. So that whole root ball around that plant literally just slid out of the ground 2 inches from frost heave.
Not getting the water and the soil contact that it was looking
Yeah,
for.
and needless to say that that grass died. So um, there is a point where you probably shouldn't be planting the herbaceous perennials.
Fair enough. Well, interesting. I think that it's, planning your design ahead, thinking of beyond the season you're in is always a necessity for a good project. But it's also useful to think that like there are times when you can, within reason, pop by the garden store and get enthusiastic about a bunch of things. But this, at the later we get in the year, that might not even be a viable way to think about making changes in your garden.
No, not plant wise, but hardscape wise. As long as the ground's not frozen, you can be digging in the ground and putting down a gravel base for a patio space or a fire pit area. Um, there's a plus, I think, to doing hardscape related projects in the fall, because if you say, oh no, we'll get to it in the spring, well, we never know when spring will actually come, number
Right.
one. And once it's here, we don't know how good or bad the weather is actually going to be.
Hmm.
If we have a very rainy spring after the snow melt that happened, you might not be able to dig in the soil until June.
Hmm.
We've had whole year schedules slide backwards because the landscape contractors were not able to start in late April or early May due to the ground just simply being too wet.
Yeah.
So
We find the same
anytime,
thing in construction with if you're pouring foundation first or if you're digging out to form foundation, that last frost date and how wet it is can have a really big impact on getting things started.
yeah, so anytime you can plan ahead and do the hardscapes now while the ground is workable
Mhm.
versus waiting till spring, and maybe you're kind of rolling the dice on that. So I kind of like hardscapes in the fall, and on the same project, the plantings just follow in the spring.
I like that a lot. From a DIYer's perspective, also, I would say there's a little bit of a lag in your impulse to get outside in the spring, like the same sort of mid 30s day that you in the fall you'd be like, I better make the most of it. I'm in the mode of getting everything done at the end of the year. In the spring, you might not really notice when it's below freezing or when it's above and sort of feel like, oh, we also have an impulse to get outside and put our shorts on in Wisconsin, of course. But I think I personally have a lag in my mental load of house projects, and I tend to sort of linger on inside projects into the spring for some reason until it gets to be mowing and planting season, at which point things getting out of control drives me out to my yard. But I think that's a good impulse too. Yeah, to think about sort of extend however much luck we have in the fall with good working outside season, putting it into hardscaping and non-planting things. So you're ready to plant when you can in the spring.
Right.
Fabulous. Well, I think this is really hopefully an inspiration for anybody who's listening to this and thinking, oh, I did want to do a few more things in my yard this year. They might roll the dice and get lucky at the garden center. They should certainly do a little bit of putting their ideas on paper so their partner or spouse can weigh in, share their opinions, make sure everyone's on the same page,
Right.
and maybe default to less plant-based projects and more organizational bed creation, hardscaping, moving things around.
Yeah, I think fall, once you've got your ideas on paper, and I love that someone might be excited and want to do a late summer, fall project. But if you just do that mental pause and say to yourself, well, we've figured out what we want to do, let's do it in the right order. You can do the prep work now. You can do your removals now. You could strip the sod where you want a plant bed. You're just not going to plant it yet. Hannah's advice was start small. If you're going to DIY your whole yard with plantings, I'd start with just one bed and, make sure you're a green thumb or not. Because it's funny, you can have this idea of what you want to tackle and you do that first bed. And once you find out all that goes into it, you might take a step back and say, you know what? The next time we do something like this, we're actually going to hire someone.
That's true of inside DIY projects too.
For sure. And the factors that go into that, age, I'd rather hire two 25-year-olds to do some grunt work for me versus me doing it. They have the right tools. I couldn't possibly have the arsenal of equipment and tools that someone who does it daily would have.
Yeah.
So those are factors. Time, what is your time worth versus paying someone? I pay someone to mulch my gardens now instead of doing it ourselves. And that means I can leave for work in the morning to an unmulched yard. And when I get home at the end of the day, it's mulched. Instead of watching that mulch pile go slowly down over 4 weeks because I'm taking it one wheelbarrow at a time. Those to me are all, I DIY stuff myself, but I always weigh those other factors into what makes sense for me to tackle myself and what shouldn't I tackle myself. And I've even paid someone to do the bed prep, which means stripping the grass, putting in the edging, tilling the soil. Well, then I have the easy part because I'm digging in this soft, rich, newly tilled soil, and it's super easy to put plants in ground like that versus hard, dry clay because I was in a
Sounding
hurry
familiar.
to get these plants in the ground.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, you're telling me all about the first bed project I did on this yard and all the things that went wrong with it. This is great. Well, and I also think too, this is so similar to inside DIY projects. You're going to find your own preferences. I know people who actually do like hanging drywall. They find it fun. I have hung drywall in my life, and I will never again in my life hang drywall. So there are things in the process of taking care of the yard that you're going to find that you like to do, that you find meditative, that you enjoy as a workout. And then there are other things that feel like, well, that's just a waste of my time and saps my energy to finish a project that I would otherwise have enjoyed. So I think that start small and try all the steps yourself once lets you take it all for a test spin. Maybe learn from a few mistakes. I started with my most prominent spot right at the front of my house. I might advise someone else to do. If you know you have a brown thumb, maybe start in the backyard. Just a thought. But yeah, I think that's really useful advice there.
starting small, you mentioned, learning from your mistakes. If you start small, maybe you're only putting a dozen perennials in and a few shrubs. And if you're bad at it or you don't have a green thumb, well, you haven't made a major investment, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But, to sketch up your whole front yard and then go out and spend thousands of dollars on plants and have the same mistakes happen is obviously going to be a much bigger deal.
Yeah.
One of the things we think about, it's simple advice, but it's right plant, right place.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes us down that road of, site conditions, sun, shade, wind, wet, dry, all those things that we use as our starting point for choosing plants. If you don't think about those things, you're going to put a sun perennial in a shade bed and then wonder why it struggled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that comes back to, probably planning on paper, probably planning in plan, thinking about shade angles, making notes on how the sun moved through your yard in the day and the year, planning ahead again. But again, you're right. Start small, and any error you make is easy to correct or absorb or replace. And it doesn't
not amplified, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Marvelous. Well, this is kind of leading us into the very next thing I want to talk to you about, which I think is a subject for our next chat. I'll tease that lightly here, which is later in the season, I'd love to talk to you about thinking not just through the seasons, but specifically thinking about the end of the season, thinking about winter and what you can do for your yard to get it ready for winter and help it look good all winter. But for now, I just want to say thank you for coming back on and sharing such good, actionable advice. I think people who are experienced in working with their yards will probably find a few good ideas today. And hopefully people who have not played around in their yard or their mid-century house will feel inspired to take a first step.
Yeah, I hope so.
Excellent. All right. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
That's it for today. I hope this has left you feeling very excited to put a few new ideas into practice this fall, or to start workshopping a plan for next spring. If you are looking for Jim's personal input into your yard, get in touch with him ASAP because he's got a months-long waiting list pretty much all the time. If you're ever looking for design advice from me and Midma Midwest, pop over to the website for one of the several ways for us to work together. Show notes for today's episode are at midmod-midwest.com/2205. Next week, we'll be digging into how to add accessibility to a mid-century home remodel, how to plan for a family member with limited mobility, make your house more host-ready for someone needing accessible accommodations, or just get set to age in place in your own home for as long as you can. I'm really excited about this one, and it's something that comes up a lot in my mid-century master plans. So gather up your questions and comments about that, and we will talk about it next week. This episode was written and recorded by me, Della Hansman, and produced by Rebecca Rossi. If you'd like to support the show and mid-century homes in general, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. You can help other people find us when you leave a rating and review, or recommend us directly to a friend with a mid-century house. Find more of Mid-Mod Remodel on Instagram, YouTube, or pop right over to our website to check out our services. I would love to design a master plan for your home, or teach you how to create one for yourself in my Ready to Remodel program. Thanks so much for listening to Mid-Mod Remodel. I love that you love your mid-century house. I love it too.